Thanks very much for inviting me. I can't believe how many coolest points I get for being on the same bill as Chuck Klosterman. It's huge. Yeah, no, it's shorter than you. I wanted to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is quarterbacks. I always come back to quarterbacks. And it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because, one, I'm obviously a big sports fan, but also I think that questions surrounding quarterbacks are lovely ways of looking at broader questions about performance and success and all kinds of interesting topics. And the question I want to sort of zero in on tonight is this question that I address in one of the essays in my collection, which is the draft a good predictor of quarterback performance? That is to say, is it possible to look at a group of college quarterbacks and tell with any degree of certainty which of them is going to be a good pro quarterback? And I have taken the position that I don't think you can. And in the kind of controversy, if you want to call it that has arisen around this question, I have been struck over and over again by the difference in the way that sports fans, or sports figures more precisely, talk about this question, and the way that psychologists talk about this question. Psychologists have a very, very different set of ideas and a very different vocabulary that they bring to bear on matters such as this. So what I thought I would do this evening is give you a sense of what a psychologist would say about the question of whether the draft predicts quarterback performance. And there's two ways of answering this question. I want to make it clear ahead of time which one I'm doing. The first way of thinking about this is just empirically look at the performance of NFL quarterbacks and see whether that correlates to any great extent with their draft position. And that empirical work has been done, and I am satisfied, although others are not, I'm satisfied that the empirical work suggests that there is little or no correlation between draft position and NFL performance. But I'm not going to dwell on that this evening. I'm interested in looking at this from a theoretical perspective, which is how I think a psychologist would examine this question. And what I'm interested in is this notion that from a theoretical perspective, the question is a foolish one, or the search for a correlation between draft position and professional performance for quarterbacks is a foolish one, for a number of very fundamental reasons that are fundamental to the way we understand human performance from a psychological perspective. The first principle that a psychologist would talk about in this concept, in this context, is this notion of what's called the flat maximum, which is something that I touch on a little bit in my book Outliers. Basically, this is the notion that in any distribution, methods of discriminating among individuals get more and more difficult as you approach the top of the distribution, right? In other words, the kinds of things that we successfully use to distinguish among people in the 50th percentile don't work at the 90th percentile. So let me give you an example. If I were to give you 1,000 people at random off the streets of Brooklyn and say, can you predict in this group, say they're all students at a high school, can you predict in this random group of 1,000 high school students the 10 students who are likely to be the best doctors? And the answer is, you can totally do that. Not perfectly, but give them an IQ test, right? We know right off, nobody with an IQ of less than 115 is going to be able to handle medical school, right? How many of that random distribution of 1,000 will have an IQ above 115? I don't know. I mean, maybe, let's say there's 20. Well, right there, that's your pool, right? And then you can maybe interview them for 10 minutes and see if those who are interested in people and medicine and science. And there you go, you're done. Now, if I were to give you a random grouping of 1,000 science students at Columbia University and ask you that same question, you can't do it anymore, right? They all have an IQ above 115. They're all interested in science. There's no way to predict who's going to be a doctor or not, right? The question's become impossible. That's a beautiful example of the flat maximum. Similarly, if I gave you 1,000 high school students at random from Brooklyn and said, pick the ones who have the ability to be an NFL basketball player, well, you just have to, throw out the overweight ones, throw out the ones who are under 5'11", throw out the ones who can't jump, and we've basically narrowed it down to a group of a pretty good, the best possible group from which to make that prediction. But if I were to give you 1,000 or 100 of the top college basketball players in the country, it becomes a lot harder. You can't throw out the fat ones because there are no fat ones. You can't throw out the ones below 5'11" because none of them are below 5'11", right? You all of a sudden you have to be more discerning in your attempt to discriminate them. Now, as you get closer and closer to the top of the distribution, to the 95th percentile, 96th, 97th, 98th, the task of making predictions about individuals necessarily goes from difficult to impossible.